You today to the Metropolitan Community Church of Washington, D.C. Spiritual Engagement Hour. It is 9 a.m. Eastern Time here, but whatever time zone you might be in, we welcome you. Or if you're discovering us later on demand, again, we welcome you. If it's your first time to be a part of an experience at MCCDC, my name is Dwayne Johnson, the senior pastor. I'd love to hear from you. My email is revdwayne@mccdc.com. I also bring you greetings from our associate pastor, Reverend Kathy Alexander, who is busy about preparing for our 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time service. We also invite you to join us for our worship at 10:30 a.m. We're here to support each other during these difficult and challenging times. We're here to learn together and grow together. With all that's going on, it's important that we check in with our bodies, our minds, and our spirits. So we invite you to take a moment now just to notice what may be happening. Every time I stop and notice, I will see a few areas that just need some love. I have a little tension just in my upper shoulder. So I'm just going to stretch that out a little bit, give it some love. A little bit of breathing. That brings almost immediate relief to that section. We light these candles today. There's 3 wicks on this candle, which reminds me of God our Creator, Jesus Christ our Savior, and the Holy Spirit who guides. These lights also remind us of our community, our mission, our vision, our call. And if at any point during this conversation today you'd like to invite us to prayer, know that any one of you can say, can we pause and just take a moment? So we're invited again to this conversation. God, we thank you for the many ways you help us to love ourselves and love others. We thank you that you help us to receive your love. Amen. Today we are looking at Luke 13:6-9, which is the parable of the gardener and the vineyard and the fig tree. The resources we're using today are from a sanctified art with the theme rest and growth. And we'll be talking about that balance between rest and growth, or that imbalance between rest and growth, whatever it might be. So I offer the scripture reading, first of all, and I invite you to think of this within the lens of rest and growth. And I'll be reading from a wonderful translation. It's the Inclusive Bible, the first egalitarian translation. Jesus told this parable. There was a fig tree growing in a vineyard. The owner came out looking for fruit on it, but didn't find any. The owner said to the vine dresser, "Look here, for 3 years now, I've come out in search of fruit on this fig tree and have found none. Cut it down. Why should it clutter up the ground?" In reply, the vine dresser said, "Please leave it 1 more year while I hoe around it and fertilize it. If it bears fruit next year, fine. If not, then let it be cut down." So ponder that for a moment. We'll keep this open if you'd like us to reread that, to revisit it, or you may have a different translation on your cell phone or something that you'd like to offer. So with that scripture in mind, here is a response to this reading by a sanctified art. The gardener in the vineyard knows the fig tree needs rest, nutrients, and time. And it also needs to produce fruit. Both things are true, which is also true for us. If we are always striving for more growth without taking time to rest, we will burn out. But if we are only ever resting, we will not bear fruit or grow. The fig tree also teaches us that the in-between time of nurture before fruit can be where transformation begins. All right, so that's a few things for us to think about. We invite, at this point, any thoughts that are coming to you. What's kind of stood out to you already, agreements, differences, promptings. You may have a reading yourself that you'd like to offer today as we talk about this idea of the fig tree and how it speaks to us about the in-between time and how it speaks to us about rest and growth. So what are you thinking out there? What's going on? How are you doing? What's been your experience with that parable in the past? How did it strike you? I'm not real crazy about the idea of only giving it one more year, because it takes a lifetime sometimes to produce. So that's a little off-putting to me, that that they're gonna say one more year, then we're gonna chop you down. That does not feel real graceful to me. There's a little grace because you're giving it a year, but I believe in a more abundant grace. I'll offer that out there, but what are some of your promptings or thoughts? How did it strike you?
Change doesn't happen overnight. Transformation doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. Giving it a year may not be enough. It's giving it a chance, but it may not be enough. Yeah, it almost feels like that's not enough time.
Mm-hmm.
Because suppose it's not a good year, and suppose the surrounding environment and elements like don't work. Like if it's what if it doesn't rain or
Mm-hmm.
that type of
Yeah.
to be able to keep it watered and so yeah, there's a lot of things that go on, I think, in that whole process
Mm-hmm.
that are affected, that could be affected by that other elements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so taking circumstances into consideration.
Yes.
Mhm.
At the same time, I'm gonna play the opposite side.
Okay,
The farmer and the owner both expect to make money off that fig tree and make their living.
okay,
And if it's standing there forever and not producing fruit, they're not making any money, they're not getting their livelihood off of it or the nutrients that they need, so
okay.
I also understand cutting it down. So sometimes that one more year can be fruitful and sometimes it is not. I'm not gonna say not give it a chance, but I understand putting a boundary on it and saying, we'll give it one more year, because most trees or fig trees, most trees period, usually produce fruit within the third year. So if it hasn't produced fruit, it's not doing what it was intended for. So I understand giving it a boundary.
Thank you. And thank you for offering the phrase an opposite view or a different view, rather than the phrase that some use, which is, I'll play the devil's advocate. And my thought on that is we have enough people playing the devil's advocate right now that we don't need to bring that in.
And actually, I thought of saying that, and then I was like, no, it's a different view, not
It's a different view. It's a different view. So thank you for that for a number of reasons. Thank you for that.
Well, one of the things that this always occurred to me is that the vine dresser says, well, let me do some hoeing and put some nutrients around it, some fertilizer. And then I wondered, had he done that the year before?
Mm-hmm.
You know, because he made it sound like, well, let me do that now, because it's not.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I wondered if the tree was actually getting the care it needed.
That's a good question.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is a good question, and I'm thinking again of our lives and why there's different levels of flourishing, and oftentimes it's the support one's received earlier in their life, early in the planting process, And even yesterday, after the A Building's memorial services, I was going home and I saw a parent being so harsh, so harsh with like a 3-year-old. And my heart went out. I knew there was not a place there other than prayer that I could do. I didn't feel it was appropriate to intervene, but I immediately started praying. Because I was kind of thinking of this already, this parable, I'm thinking, what nutrients is this young child receiving? What nourishment, what nurture, what support?
And it's funny that you bring that up, because I was thinking about, people with special needs. It's been discovered that the earlier they get the extra support,
Hmm,
the more they can adapt their abilities to the world to take care of themselves.
yes,
So sometimes that extra support, that extra one-on-one attention is what they need in order to flourish. So maybe that's what this tree needed, was the extra attention in order to flourish.
thank you.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think of like how the tree would feel if they were conscious, like seeing how everyone else has figs and they don't. And I know I've felt that at times. Like immediately what I thought of was my career. I think I've been like, I realized, oh, I needed to hear this because I wasn't even realizing how much I was pushing faster and faster instead of letting the fertilizer just sink in.
Mhm.
Like, it's okay to chill, Sarah, and wait for the figs. They're gonna grow, just because I see other people and I compare myself to them sometimes in their career. And I'm like, oh, they're further along than me, and
Mhm.
I feel jealous and stuff sometimes. So that was what I heard for my own lesson in that.
Thank you. In comparison and competition, in many ways can really strangle growth and transformation. It creates this additional stress, pressure, all of that. So that's a good thing to notice there, I think. That takes different, the comparison competition thing takes on different forms, I think, at different stages in life, at different seasons. So it's another piece to put in there as well about this idea of how does these kinds of feelings show up at various stages in our lives, and how do we be aware of that in a way that we can continue on the path of transformation, yet in different ways.
And I think too, like what I said about the boundaries, sometimes we give people grace. And when do we say, okay, I've given you grace so many times and you're not even trying to change that I see. It's not necessarily that they're not, it's what you see. And for my health, my emotional health, where do I cut that, make that boundary and say, I have to give you some space now. I've put in extra nourishment, I've given extra time.
Mhm.
Now I need to put a boundary because I don't see
Mhm.
where it's helping you at all.
Yeah.
And it may just be what you see.
Sure.
And not what the person or even what that fig tree is really going through.
Mhm. Yeah. Guess what as you were sharing that, what came to me was sometimes people need a different fertilizer.
Mhm. Right,
It's not just fertilizer, but maybe a different fertilizer.
right.
Or in that translation would be a different voice.
Mhm.
We all can have different, people respond to each other in different ways. And sometimes it's it's time for new fertilizer. And I know someone recently who had a very effective therapist and counselor. And then has been very effective. It's created a lot of growth and a lot of opportunities. And then there came a time when that relationship had kind of served what it could serve. And it was time for different fertilizer or a different voice or a different presence. And again, to be peaceful about that process of life makes me think of a Jan Van Zant who said, people come into our lives for a reason, a season, or a lifetime.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a reason. And then life changes, the process moves. And there's another voice that comes into to life at that season. And to be grateful for the experiences preceding, and then be grateful for how the transformation begins to shift.
Yeah, that really helps me because I found this new health practitioner. I have a lot of chronic illness issues and I've been attached to this one provider. So I've been receiving this fertilizer. It's been good, but I found someone new. And I'm all anxious about, oh my God, what does this mean? But I think they might have some fertilizer for me that I need that this one doesn't have anymore. And sometimes, like in nature, sometimes you just have to try it and see what happens.
Yes.
And you experiment with, if you have a garden or an orchard or whatever, you experiment with the right amount of water, the right fertilizer. And then it's okay to course correct if it's not working. So it made me step, like, I was really wrapped up with, does this mean I have to let go of this old fertilizer? And maybe it does, but maybe I go back to it if it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It kind of gives me some peace around that discernment.
I'm actually speaking from that a little bit. I'm going through a situation with our 3-year-old golden doodle dog who had surgery night before last because he swallowed an object that it was dangerous for him. And it was like 12 hours of care and so on in the emergency hospital. Then I brought him home after they dug it out of his stomach. And now I'm supposed to be feeding him and giving him medication, but he's not wanting to eat. And I finally this morning got him to drink a little water. He'd peed in the house just before that, so I don't know. He had something. Anyway, the thing I'm going through now is I'm trying not to be impatient. The doctor says, well, this is going to take time. And so I keep trying to give him some food and he doesn't seem to be interested. It makes me very nervous. He has a cone that he's wearing on his head so he doesn't get anything else in his stomach and pick anything up. And he seems depressed. And so I'm in a kind of caregiving situation here where it's like the tree in the sense I have a patient, if you will, who can't tell me, what's going on exactly. I have to sort of intuit what it might be. And of course, I call the doctor and get advice. But anyway, it's frustrating because I want him to be well.
Yes.
He's only 3 years old, so he's very active and he's a wonderful, friendly dog. And at the moment, he's sort of dragging his heels and walking around a little bit, and so on and so forth. And strangely enough, without getting gross about it, I took him out this morning because he wanted to go out. And actually, just before that, he had a bowel movement on the rug. And I don't even know where it came from because he hasn't eaten anything for quite a while, but it did. So I'm feeling way in over my head in a sense. So much of it has to do with just being patient.
Yes, patience. It's a word that certainly comes up. We'll be praying for Lolo. I get the name right?
That's right. That's right.
Lolo. We'll be praying for Lolo. And you, as you care for Lolo.
Thanks.
Mhm. So, yeah, there's words that have come up: grace, patience, fertilizer. We're talking about fertilizer. Other thoughts out there that may be a slightly different direction or a new entry point? We certainly welcome what's on your hearts today. What's coming up for you?
The one thing that's come up for me is reading the Bible 90 days. The Israelites had the year of Sabbath rest
Mhm.
for the land. So every 7 years, they gave it a year of rest. Just picking what was kind of growing naturally, but not actively working in the field or maximizing output. So I had to think of it immediately as I read this, or as I heard the story this morning. I didn't think of this before,
Mhm.
but kind of being intentional about the rest of the Sabbath is something I think that's often missing. At least I can tell for myself, like
Mhm.
missing for other folks as well. Kind of allowing ourselves to give that time, not just to re-energize, but to actually grow or see what we actually need or
Mhm.
what's missing. So I think that's an important message for me.
Mhm. Yeah. Sabbath to keep it holy. And when I say that, I'm spelling holy with the WHOL, keep it holy. I think that's what it's about.
And
Holy, with an H, brings up the holier than thou kind of connotations. But remember, the Sabbath to keep it holy is about this idea of wholeness. And it's very countercultural, I think, to be a people who experience Sabbath and the meaning of the word that we see in ancient writings. The higher value seems to be busyness and productivity. And just as you're going about even today, as you're talking, if you ask someone, how are you? Notice how many times people say busy as the answer to that question. You ever hear someone say, oh, I'm rested today? When's the last time you heard someone say that?
Not often.
Yeah, like busy. Yeah, it's just something to think about.
It's funny because every time I'm on my way home, I call Joanne and say, I'm on my way. And she's like, okay. And then when I get home after our greetings, she says, so how was your day? And I always say, busy.
Yeah.
Or today was a headbanger day, which means it was really, really bad. But I never say, well, it was kind of calm and peaceful.
Yeah.
So Joe, I owe you an apology. I need to look at how I answer you.
Just,
Me as well.
just something to notice. Mhm.
So
Well,
thank you for that.
I'm thinking also about our national situation these
Yeah.
days. There's not much sense here of, I think, hoeing and putting some new fertilizer in or waiting to see what happens. It seems to be a big rush all the time to change everything. And this parable doesn't, it comes from a very different place, I think, despite the fact that I agree with the person who said earlier, this is about, they need to make money on this tree. And it's got to produce, but they're going to give it more time. But that's not what I'm seeing in our government right now. It's now or never. And that doesn't feel very sane or certainly not holy in the sense you're talking about it, Reverend Wayne.
Yes. Thank you for bringing this into the current context. In my personal view, what's happening now is that fig trees full of figs are being chopped down.
Yeah, yes,
When I talk about fig trees full of figs, I'm talking about the services that we've offered, the help that's been offered around international aid. That is so much a part of a deeper value, caring for people. Department of Education, we're talking about support for education and for young. To me, that's all real figgy stuff. And that unfortunately is being chopped down.
yep,
Big trees are being chopped down just all over the place without discernment, without thought, as some kind of control or power. And to me, it speaks to the danger of unthoughtful, unplanned power moves and control. And that's part of the tragedy. I think that's why many people are grieving right now because they're seeing this. They're seeing the violence.
Sarah said about the consciousness of the tree. How would that tree feel if it was a flourishing tree and then all of a sudden, because I think about, I attended an activity at the church I grew up in, and I was talking with somebody that I grew up with, and they said that their son was in fear of losing his job because he worked for the federal government. How do those people feel? Because now, even if they were somebody who produced, they live in constant fear. And then I was talking with a coworker, and she said that their spouse just went ahead and retired and took that buyout because she said that he had gotten like 5 to 10 emails a day about it because he had 23 years of service. Yeah, take this buyout. When do you get tired?
Yes.
And I thought about that. I was like, but look at all that experience that we're losing.
Yes.
Then I think about my job where I threatened to retire, and they said, if you work at home, will you work longer? So the support systems are different. And the way that people are valued are different, just like the way the fig trees value was different. But do we just chop them down and cut them out?
well, thank you for that very much, and Reverend Dwayne, too. I have to say that the thing I haven't said yet is, I think that all beings have divine souls, and they're all God's creatures, they're all whatever. And so this idea that somehow we should just go around wantingly cut down trees because they're in the way, or they're not producing or whatever, is we're actually violating another being who's part of our I call them all my kin. And so that's another piece about this story, that he threatened to cut it down and then they decided not to. But how many other trees did get cut down? And certainly lots of them are being cut down now for supposedly good reasons, but oftentimes no good reason at all. And we're violating another being. And that to me is on our conscience, on our conscience.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that reminder. We tend to say the fig tree, and yet if we recognize fig trees as kin, we would say fig tree. Or actually give it a name even, to keep that in mind. So this text speaks to growth, speaks to rest, It speaks to the current context we're living in. And it also speaks to climate crisis. Some touch points there that are really important. In many cases, it's chopping down something that is producing to supposedly create space for something to produce differently. Fortunately, it is wiping out land. It's, in some cases, trees have been chopped down to create space for landfills, which is just talk about violation.
Mhm. Well, and we forget that sometimes what we think of as the chief product of someone is not what it really is. Because to me, like, a tree's biggest benefit in our lives is the oxygen that it produces and the shade that it produces, not even necessarily a fruit off of which we're gonna make money. Because I can think, I grew up in the country, and oftentimes, one of my favorite things during the summer when I was a kid was to take a book and go out and put my back up against a tree and read. And my mother knew that was where I had one certain tree. She knew that was where she could find me. But we often forget, like you said, Reverend Dwayne, about the climate change, chopping down trees and things of nature has changed our earth. We've taken away shelter for other animals, other plants. We've taken away their food. Do we consider all of those things? And given the current political climate, we're even going to be less protective of our natural resources, which scares me.
Sure.
Because I don't think people realize how reliable we are on the natural resources. We can't go out here and make oxygen.
Yeah.
It's the plants that do. And when you say we're not gonna protect the plants, we're not gonna protect this, we're not gonna protect that, because it's costing us money, we need to drill oil instead. Is it really costing us money? Can we find that energy or that oil in another way without destroying the land?
Thank you.
Yeah, that's, my mind went to that too, like. The figs are really important from a more anthropocentric view, but the tree is this beautiful living being in its own right. Plus, not to mention this beautiful home for insects and birds and all the other benefits. But it's making me think about, this conversation is really making me think about like this terrible predicament of capitalism that we're in and this human-centric culture that we're in. And it feels really hopeless for me a lot of the time because it's like, even this concept of rest, like as a therapist, I can't tell you how many clients come and rest that itself is so triggering for them. They can't tolerate it. And I've experienced that myself. Like it's so intolerable to slow down. And I think part of that is like being raised in this terrible capitalist culture, and especially in the US, like I think it's so threatening to our worth to consider like if we're lazy or unproductive or something, it's so hurtful. And then I think it really harms us as individuals, and then obviously like the way that we engage with each other and non-human animals, plants, other living beings, like this terrible thing with Greenpeace and the like getting sued and stuff.
Hmm.
But it's like it's capitalism,
Yes.
yeah.
Hmm. Thank you.
That's so funny. It made me think of a house I lived in at one time that was, when I moved in, I didn't know it had mice, but the roof leaked. So I called the landlord and they got the roof fixed, and then all of a sudden I had mice. The mice were living in the roof, and now all of a sudden they couldn't get air,
Ooh.
and I was overrun. So every time I trap a mouse and then I get rid of it, I would say a prayer. God, forgive me for taking this life,
Hmm.
but I also need to live comfortably and not in fear of getting a disease or getting bit or having things ruined. And it was so funny because my partner at the time was like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, I'm saying a prayer over their life. So how do we value even that mouse's life? And even though it was a nuisance to me, I still saw the value in it. So how do we see the value in others' life? And when I say others, I don't just mean people, I mean the plants, the insects, the fish, the birds, the animals. Do we see the value in them?
There is, I hear what you're saying, and that's very touching to think about the prayer for sure. It's very indigenous, actually, in some ways, in that sense about asking for prayer for taking a life. Also, though, there is something called a have a heart trap, and you can capture the mouse. And now you had many, apparently. We've had a few around, and we get to have a heart trap, and then we drive a few miles away from home and let it out. Because we don't want to take the life, as you were expressing as well. And those they're options for us if we want to honor that life. And prayer is certainly one of them, that's for sure.
Starting to come to culmination of our time. If there's someone who would like to share that's not had an opportunity, we welcome anyone who would like to share what's on their hearts or minds today. It's always a very rich conversation with lots of other directions that are prompted by this conversation, additional things to think about. So value your insights and promptings. Thank you all. I'll offer this thought, one more thought from a sanctified art, and it speaks to grace and the theme of grace in this text. And they write, God's grace is deeper than the ocean. God's love is wider than the sky. We are seen. We are claimed. We are forgiven. May this realization change and inspire us. Thanks be to God. So again, we thank each of you on site, online, and for those who join us later on demand, we are grateful for you as well. So let us go today in that sense of grace, in that sense of love, knowing that we are deeply valued, and we are seen. And may we look to the kin around us, tree, sky, bird, squirrel, low, and know that we are all connected in divine wholeness. Amen.